today. It's going to end badly. The world is telling me that if the tariffs aren't dropped, I'm going to die, and my family is going to go hungry. I'm not a proponent of for or against, okay, guys? I understand the purpose of them, but I don't live and die on those things. I don't live and die if God had given us a different president. I know that shocks some people. I thank God for His direction for our country. I thank God that He places in power whom He wills, and that we can trust Him. And whatever God is doing, we do not need to worry, because God is working in our generation just like He did in the last. He might be doing it in different ways, and we have to realize that. God didn't deal with Isaac in the same way He did with Abraham. He didn't tell Isaac, hey, you got to leave everything you know. Why? Because Abraham had already set a foundation. So his relationship with God was different, but it wasn't wrong. It was based on a good, sure foundation. God goes on, He says, because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. It all goes back to his father. Yes, God is now making a relationship, a covenant with Isaac, but Abraham was faithful, so God is being faithful to Isaac and making that relationship. And he's calling Isaac, your dad is your example. Your father set an example. Was Abraham perfect? No. All my kids know, no, he was not perfect. Abraham made mistakes, yet he still obeyed God. He kept God's commandments and statutes and laws. You know, interestingly, most Jewish commentators are like, well, Abraham was perfect. I'm like, no. You should know this. But he was the example. He was the one who led in the picture. So what did Isaac do? It's interesting. It's one verse. 4 words. So Isaac, 5. My math is bad. So Isaac lived in Gerar. That's all it says. What does that tell you? Isaac believed God. Isaac believed God. God had a conversation with him. I believe, most likely, he had an encounter with pre-incarnate Christ. Why? Because it says that God appeared to him. Now, this is my opinion, okay? You don't have to believe that. Just my opinion. I believe he had an encounter with Christ, calling him to covenant with him. God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. That relationship. Now here's a testing. This is a testing Isaac wasn't expecting, which is funny because his father was there before. Isaac probably was wondering, how's God going to physically provide for my family? How's He going to provide the food? I'm trusting Him. How's He going to do that? But he wasn't prepared for what this has. When the men of the place asked about his wife, he said, you know, it's interesting, the difference between Isaac and Abraham. Abraham knew what they were going to say. He made a plan. It was a premeditated lie. Let's use that word. Usually we use that with murder, but Abraham premeditated his lie. But here, Isaac wasn't even thinking that until he got asked about her. They didn't know if he was married to her or not. And so, Isaac falls in a very similar trap to his dad. The only difference is she doesn't get kidnapped like Sarah twice. She doesn't get taken by the ruler of the people twice. I believe that God gave some kind of protection here, even though Isaac lied. Isaac made choices in a similar way to his father, but look at this. He says, "She is my sister." And why did he do that? For he was afraid to say, "My wife," thinking, "the men of the place might kill me on account of Rebekah, for she is beautiful." Now Rebekah probably didn't like the fact that he said she is my sister, but she probably liked the fact that he thought this because she was beautiful. She's too beautiful to say she's my wife, because they'll kill me for her. She's worth dying for, or she's worth killing for, sorry. But he falls into the same trap. He too fears the men, but this is an on-the-spot lie. But we see here again, this is Isaac's story. He's different than Abraham. Yes, there's a lot of similarities. It's actually in the same place, but it's a very different story in the same sense, because Isaac is a different person. Isaac is going on his own journey. Abraham took many, many chapters, almost twice as many, well, 3 times as many as Isaac. Isaac only has you can fit the lifespan of Isaac in about 3 chapters or less. And yet you have from chapter 12 to 25 is Abraham's lifespan. That's pretty impressive. But here, God packs essentially the majority of Isaac's life into 1 chapter. And we're seeing God's work in his life. And look what happens. It came about when he had been there a long time. So I don't know what a long time is, but I expect it was at least a year. Most likely. We don't know the exact amount of time, but it was long enough that it was clear that he'd been there a while and had been telling the same lie. So it came about when he'd been there a long time that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out through a window. Just happened to look out. And Isaac was caressing his wife. That means he was touching her in a way that you would not touch your sister. It was very clear to Abimelech, this man and that woman are not siblings. He is her husband. Now, somehow he got away with it for that long. I don't know how. But at this moment, he then calls Isaac. And you know what's funny? In Isaac's defense, Abimelech's anger actually points to the immorality of the people of the land. Just pay attention. Then Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Behold, certainly she is your wife. How then did you say she is my sister?" He's like, this is a replay of your father. Remember Abraham? Remember your dad? He did the same thing to me, and he calls all the women in our people to not be able to have children. And here you're trying to do essentially the same thing, except I didn't take your wife because she's too young for me. I'm too old now. If it's the same one, I don't know. And Isaac said, because I said I might die on account of her. As though that's going to assuage his anger. It's going to make him calm down. I don't think so. And Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." Easily have lain with your wife? Just like, he's showing how immoral they really are. How different they are. I don't know if they're much different than the area where Isaac grew up. You know, maybe in Beersheba, the people were more chaste, for lack of a better word. But here in the Philistines' land, some guy could have just taken her. That's what Abimelech is saying, right? Yeah, that's what he's saying. He's saying, we are sinful people, and we would have done this, could have done this. This could have happened. Why would you do such a thing to us and bring guilt on us? What? So, he doesn't even realize that they're bringing guilt upon themselves if they did that, whether it was his wife or not. They don't even realize that living in an immoral way outside of the bond of marriage is wrong. Period. That's how warped their thinking is. And it shows how different God's standard was in that time. It's just as different as today. You go out on the streets and it's like even people who go to church think it's okay to sleep around. Yet the very same people will talk in degrading ways about people who have a different sexual identity, which I don't agree with. I don't think it's biblical. But they'll talk badly about that, yet their sin is not a problem. I'm sorry. That is hypocrisy at the highest level. We cannot deal with other sin and say, well, that immorality is wrong, but mine is okay. I'm sorry. That is not a biblical standard. But this is the way the world works. We should not be surprised that the world is much today like it was at the time of Abimelech. The world is very similar today. Men and women getting together just for that. There are apps just for that. There are websites just for that. There are clubs just for that. There are bars just for that. There are social gatherings just for that. And sadly, there are social gatherings for people who are already married and they're doing things together. It is sickening. And it's all over this country. It's not just large cities like New York and LA. I'm talking towns like Louisville and other areas. And it's becoming more and more normal. And this should horrify us as Christians. It should draw us to our knees. It should make us more and more adamant to share the good news of Jesus Christ, because there are thousands and millions of people in this nation going to hell right now. And sadly, some of them are sitting in a church this morning and they think they're okay because no one in their church is speaking the truth anymore. I was talking to a customer, and he was talking about how he had started going to an Episcopal church in Louisville. And he's like, I really like them. And you know, they're so accepting. There's like 3 gay people in the choir. And man, those guys can sing. And I'm thinking, I'm like, that's probably the minimum of the problem in the church there. That's just the surface issues. We're not talking about actual lifestyle beyond that. The world wants that. They want to be accepted by the church. Why? Because the church is supposed to be a representation of Jesus Christ. That's why they want so badly for you to accept and to condone and to applaud their lifestyle. That's why Romans 1 is that way. That's why the world gets so angry when Christians say, I can't approve of that lifestyle. Well, that's all you have to do. You don't have to do it. It's the same thing. This part was a little extra, but I actually wasn't planning on sharing that much about that. But I want us to see that the world that Isaac was living in, while there wasn't internet, was very much immoral. Immorality has been around since the beginning of time, since sin entered the world. And so to believe that, well, immorality is just way worse now, you haven't lived in the days of Rome. I'm sorry. Or maybe Athens back in the Greek time, when it was common for men to have a young male partner as well as a wife. I mean, this was the Greek city-state. This is common historical knowledge. We're not living in a time that is much different than other times. It's just in comparison to 20 years ago for our nation, we're comparing to short-term history. We're not looking at long-term history. Wickedness has been in the world for a long time. We're just seeing it for the first time in many in our generation in a very explicit and very in-your-face attitude. And here, it was that way. It was that way. And Isaac probably had a right to think that it could be his life if someone wanted to. So Abimelech, despite being deceived, he gives a charge. It says he charged all the people, verse 11, and he said, he who touches, my translation says touches. The word is actually molests, harasses. That's the word. Anyone who harasses this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. So this is talking about sexual items, okay? We're not talking about just touching the guy. He's talking specifically about bothering him in a way because of her beauty. Bothering them because of this. So he's essentially saying, you can't bother them this way. Stay away. If you don't, you will die. It's interesting, with Isaac and Abraham, with both of them, Abimelech would never... Isn't it interesting that sex with someone who is married was considered taboo even by the pagans of that time? It's okay before marriage, but once they're married, that's a no-no. What are we doing in our society? It's heartbreaking. Honestly, it's a work of the devil. Because he knows if he can destroy marriages, he can destroy families. And if the family is broken down, then the bedrock of society is broken. And eventually you have what is beginning to happen in our nation, where you have men, boys and girls being raised by opposite gender, all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And these children don't have examples in their life of one or the other. And they don't know how to function in a good societal order. And there's no order. And we're the strange ones because we have children and are married. Now, this happens. It's a trial. Honestly, I think it's a trial of God to see how he responds. But look at God's faithfulness. God didn't say, if you're perfect while you're here. He said, stay. That was the only condition. So see how God fulfills. Remember, famine. What's a famine again? A time when nothing grows. Verse 12. Now Isaac sowed in that land. Now who in their right mind grows food in the middle of a famine? He knows there's a famine. But he sowed in the land and and reaped in the same year. So he planted in the spring, and he harvested in the fall. And what does it say? He reaped in the same year 100-fold. That means for every grain of corn that he put in the ground, he got 100. Every pea, every, what are those? What's hummus made out of? The chickpea. Probably had chickpeas, most likely. Every almond thing, whatever he planted, all that he planted that year, he got 100 times what he planted. In the middle of a famine, that is impossible. If you don't believe that God is faithful, here is Exhibit A. God was faithful. He gave him 100 times what he planted in the middle of a famine. A time of famine is typically a time when there's no rain. Somehow God provided food out of nothing. They did not go hungry. They did not go to Egypt. They did not do it the world's way. He trusted God. I don't know if God told him to sow, because Isaac was a herder. He probably typically traded his animals for food, for other types of food. Yet here he plants and God provides 100 times what he needs. What a blessing. God is faithful. God tells him, I will bless you. I will provide for you. I will be with you. And he does. And it says, and the Lord blessed him. There should be no confusion that this was not the work of Isaac. Isaac did sow, but God brought the increase. Just like in evangelism, we can sow the seed of the gospel, yet we cannot bring the increase. God alone can. So God blessed him, and the man, Isaac, became rich and continued to grow richer until he became very wealthy. This is before Abraham died, right? I told you we were going back in time. Because if Jacob and Esau had already been born, there's no way Abimelech would have confused Rebekah as his sister. How would they explain two kids that look like them? So God was already blessing Isaac before Abraham had died. And it goes on to explain his possession. For he had possessions of flocks and herds and a great household, so that the Philistines envied him. He had so much that even the world was envying what he had. Like, how does he have all that? They're so envious that they begin to fill in the wells of his father. Because they couldn't touch Isaac and Rebekah, right? They couldn't physically harm them. Because the king had said, if you do, you'll die. So they're like, well, how else can we harass him? How else can we bother him without actually bothering him? They're like, well, let's fill in all the wells. So they go and fill the wells with dirt. Isn't this like the devil? It's another test. It's a test of Isaac's desire to obey God. God's blessing came, and then here comes the trial. And I don't know if Abimelech realized what was going on, but look at how Abimelech then responds. And Abimelech, verse 16 says, go away from us, for you are too powerful for us. You know, he didn't say that to Abraham. Abraham, he said, you can stay wherever you want in my land. But with Isaac, he asked him to leave. Hey, you're too close. You're too powerful. You see, it's Abimelech coming to him. And you notice in verse 26, Abimelech comes to him all the way in Beersheba to make a treaty. That's like 50 to 60 miles. That's a long way in that time. I know it's hard in a car society to think 50, 60 miles. That's a long journey on foot, or riding a camel, or whatever Abimelech had. Maybe a donkey. But Isaac is so blessed that Abimelech sees that he's even more blessed than his father. And Abraham is still alive. Just think about when Isaac receives everything that belongs to Abraham. And so Isaac, the one thing I notice about Isaac is he's not a very confrontational man. Because look at how he's run. It says, and Isaac departed from there and camped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. So he moved away from him. Still similar area, far enough, but he was too close apparently to Abimelech. So he moved to an area just a little bit further away. And just look how he responds. Verse 18, then Isaac dug again the wells of water which had been dug in the days of his father Abraham. So all those wells that got filled in, he went and emptied them all out. He dug them all out again. And he gave them all the same names that his dad had given them. Now, at this point, Abraham is dead. So this is where I think somewhere between 17 and 18, well, somewhere around this time is when Jacob and Esau enter the picture. Sometime after the incident with Abimelech's seeing Isaac caressing Rebekah. Some point after that, Esau and Jacob enter the picture. Because we know that Esau and Jacob were alive before Abraham died. If we do all the math. So, if that's the case, verse 18 most definitely is after the death, because it says, after had been done in the days of Abraham, and the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. So this whole issue with wells, you know what makes me remember? Why did they wait till after the death of Abraham to do this? Right. Abimelech had made a covenant with Abraham about the wells. Remember, Abraham complained to him about the wells when he wanted a covenant? And a part of that covenant was that they would leave their wells alone and stop saying that they were theirs. So now that covenant is over because Abraham is dead. So they start filling in all those wells like, hey, now that he's gone, we can pester Isaac. This is a way to get back at him. So they go, Isaac digs those wells up again, gives them the same things as his father. But when they did and found there a well of flowing water, what happens? They start complaining and whining and accusing them of stealing their water. But man, I feel like we're living today. There are constant battles out west right now over water rights. Especially in states like Colorado, especially where it's really dry. People buy water rights. You can buy water rights, by the way, for land you don't own. So you own the water rights, but you don't own the land on top of it. But the people who own that land can't dig a well because you own the water. So you have to make sure when you buy land that you have the water rights. I don't know what it is here, but if you're buying land for a well, you might want to think about that. I don't know. But all that to say is they're quarreling over this, and they say the water is ours. So what does Isaac do? He renames it. He names the well Esek, which means contention. And then he digs another well. He's like, okay, you can have this well. I'm just going to call it Esek. It's a contentious well, so I'll move on. And he digs another well, and they quarreled over it too, so he named it Sitnah, which means strife, or a quarreling between them. And then they quarreled over that one too, so he moved away and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it, so he named it Rehoboth. For he said, at last the Lord has made room for us, and we will be fruitful in the land. So he settles there. He finally found a well that no one wants. Maybe they were like, we got 2 wells, we don't need any more. Maybe he had to move far enough away that they're like, okay, he's not close enough to our land now. We've done what we wanted. I'm not sure, but it's interesting that after this, He digs this well, and then he moves. This is when he moves back to Beersheba. And it ends up being where he lives the rest of his life. But when he moves back, we have another appearance of God. And the Lord appeared to him the same night. So the very night that he moved back to Beersheba. You know, it's interesting. Beersheba is also where God appeared to Abraham. And he planted the tamarisk tree. You remember that? The first tree planted by Abraham. The first plant that we know of. And the Lord appeared to him. I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. This I am statement, this is why the Jews got so angry at Jesus. Because Jesus was saying, I am. This is what Isaac is experiencing. At this point, God is making himself very clearly your God. I am yours. I'm not just the God of your father. I am your God. Yes, I am the God of your father, but I am with you. You obeyed me. You stayed in the land as I asked you to do. And I told you I would be with you, and now I am. I told you I would have relationship with you, and I am with you. I told you I would bless you, and I have, and I will continue to do that. You don't need to fear. You don't need to go about it the world's way. I am your God. I will bless you, 24, and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham. You know what's interesting? In the Old Testament, the idea of my servant is only applied to the patriarchs, Moses, Caleb, and finally David. It's pretty interesting. People who, against all odds, chose to follow God. And that's how he describes Abraham. Abraham went through some amazing trials, and God called him my servant. But you see the culmination most clearly in the book of Numbers of my servant. It's interesting that in Isaiah 40 through 66, those chapters, servants of the Lord is applied to the people of God. And you notice in the New Testament, what does Jesus say about those who do well? When you get before the Lord, what does he say? Well done, good and faithful nobody? No, servant. Good and faithful servant. We should desire to be his servants. It is not a badge of dishonor, it's actually a badge of honor. It's a title given to people of God. In Numbers 14:24, it says of Caleb, he was imbued with a different spirit and remained loyal to me. That is what a servant of God is. Someone who stands against the tide and remains loyal to God no matter what circumstances come their way. That's what God was saying about Abraham. And I believe by extension, Isaac. And you see what happens when God has this conversation with him. This is the first time that we see Isaac building an altar and calling upon the name of the Lord. Look. So he built an altar, verse 25, and there called upon the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there. There Isaac's servants dug a well. The word is started digging a well. The Hebrew is the beginning of a well. The well is not dug yet. They started to dig the well. There's going to be an event that happens, and then the well is finished. at the end of this chapter. But again, we're seeing God building relationship with Isaac. He's showing us as believers that the torch may pass from generation to generation, but God makes that covenant with each generation. He makes that relationship with each generation. It is not a family thing. It is only family because that child chooses to obey God. That child chooses to trust God. God, by His Holy Spirit, speaks to them. And what a blessing that God does that. I pray that each of us would have Isaacs in our family. That we would have children, that every one of my children would follow in the footsteps of God. And your children, and your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, that there would be a legacy of faithfulness to God, of God touching the hearts of our children and our grandchildren, and bringing them to Him. That they would have encounters with the living God. That they would not rely upon the stories of their parents, but they would remember and have encounters with God, whether 1, 2, 3, 4, however many, that God would be continually in their path, speaking to them and guiding them. That's my heart desire. Because when God does this, He causes those that could cause us harm to come running truly in fear to make covenants with us. And that's what happens here at the end of chapter 26. So Abimelech came to him from Gerar, that is, current Gaza area, up to Beersheba, which is just south of Jerusalem. Now, Israel, honestly, is a small country. That land is small, but the journey was not insignificant. But he's coming all that way because he wants a covenant with Isaac. And he doesn't come alone. He brings his advisor, his counselor, and the commander of his army. He wants both of them there with him when he makes this covenant with Isaac. And there's no doubt, when we saw this covenant between Abimelech and Abraham, it wasn't clear. I thought it would look like Abraham was being covenanted with, that Abimelech was truly wanting this covenant. Though it was kind of fuzzy. Here it's very clear who wants the covenant. It's very clear who is afraid of whom. Abimelech is afraid of Isaac, and he's decided he must make a covenant with him. And isn't it interesting that God's covenant with Isaac is the first one, and then his covenant with a man is second? God causes this man to be afraid enough that he wants to have a treaty with him. But Isaac, he responds a little, he's avoided conflict quite a bit, but listen to his words. He says, "Why have you come to me since you hate me and have sent me away from you?" Now we know Isaac's true feelings. It's like, y'all don't like me. It's clear to me that you don't like me. You hate me, actually. Why are you coming to me? And they said, I'm guessing that Abimelech and his guys strolled up and they're like, "What's up, Isaac? How you doing?" Acting like nothing had happened. We're just best friends now. Have you ever experienced that with somebody that got angry at you and then treated you badly? And they want to act like nothing happened because they want something from you? That's kind of how I feel it must have went. They're coming up like, "Hey, how you doing? It's so great to see you." And Isaac's like, "Why are you coming to me? You hate me. You made me leave." And they said, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you." So we said, "Let there now be an oath between us, even between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you." You know, the interesting thing about this covenant and the covenant that Abimelech made with Abraham is Abimelech says, I. In this case, he says, us, or we. Why? Because Isaac at this point is more powerful than even Abraham was. And guess what? He had 2 sons. I don't know at what age they were at this point, but he is fearful enough to say, we, our whole people, all of us 3 and everyone we represent, we're making a covenant with you because we are afraid. We see plainly that the Lord has been with you. It's not, we've never seen someone get 100-fold from planting 1 seed in the middle of a famine nonetheless. That is clearly God. And then you just keep getting wealthier and wealthier. It's clearly from God. So we said, let there now be an oath between us, but even between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you. That you will do no harm to us. See, this is their whole motivation. They're fearful. And it's interesting. He says, just as we have not touched you and have done to you nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace, you are now the blessed of the Lord. You know, they're referring back to the Rebekah incident. That's what we have not touched you. But the second part, it's like, filling all the wells in, that wasn't mean. You really sent us away in peace? Isaac left in peace. You didn't send him away in peace. You told him to leave. And he left peacefully. But you know what? He chooses to make a covenant with them. He doesn't argue with them about how they're not peaceful. Or I think his statement at the beginning was enough for them to hear that he wasn't excited about how they treated him when he left. And he leaves it at that, and then verse 30 it says, then he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. This is how most covenants would end. Why would you eat together? To show that you're not enemies anymore. That's why I think in the New Testament, eating with someone who is at odds with the church is considered wrong. Because it's showing harmony and unity with that person. At least culturally. I don't know today. But he made them a feast, and they ate and drank, and in the morning they arose early, exchanged oaths. Then Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. God provided peace to him. He caused... Isn't that interesting how God's blessing brought peace to Isaac? They envied him, and they tried to staunch what God was doing. They even tried to stop his wells, which would affect his livestock and his whatever thing he's planting. That would have affected everything he was doing. Yet God still continued to bless him in spite of all that they were doing. In spite of everything the devil and these men through him were trying to do, God blessed him. So much so that they realized we need a covenant with him, because if he becomes our enemy, we will be destroyed. We cannot defeat him. And God brings him peace. You know, it's interesting. Isaac is never mentioned as having to go to battle. But Abraham does. Now, obviously, with Abraham, he's going out to get his nephew. But Isaac never has to go to battle. God always takes care of him. God always provides for him. And you know what happens now? God brings him peace, and then he brings him that which brings even more blessing. The well. Now it came about on the same day that Isaac's servants came in and told him about the well which they had dug, and said to him, "We have found water." So he started digging the well before this incident happened, and at the very moment, at the same time that these men left in peace, they had a covenant, which, by the way, would mean no more messing with Isaac's wells. God gave him a well. So he called it Shiva. Now, you know what Shiva doesn't mean? Oath. It doesn't mean peace. It actually means 7. Isn't that interesting? What do you know about the word 7 in Hebrew? It's a number of completion. He's saying God has fulfilled what he promised. You know what? Abimelech is mentioned 7 times in this chapter. Abraham mentioned 7 times. Chapter 21, you remember the last covenant? 27 times. Sorry, 7 times in 21. Abimelech and Abraham. Now, I'm not a big number person, but I think it's very interesting that in this point, there is a completion of God's promises to Isaac. It's not an accident that he named the well Shiva. It's the name that his father had given a well there previously. But he found a complete moment there. He now had peace. He had water. He had everything he needed. God had provided everything. Honestly, we could think of this as the well of contentment. He was contented. God had given him everything he needed. There was no reason for him to go anywhere else. God told him to stay in the land, that he would bless him and keep him and provide for him. And what did God do? He did all that and more, above and beyond what could be imagined by the worldly standard. The question is, will we be like Isaac? Will we trust God even though it doesn't seem like what God is directing us to do would bring God's blessing? I don't know. That's between you and the Lord. That's between me and the Lord. Because sometimes the world's ways make more sense to us. Because all the advice we're being given is saying, oh yeah, this is how we should do it. That's how you should. Oh yeah, you would be ignorant not to do that. That'll for sure bring blessing to your life. No, obedience to God brings blessing. It may not look like it from the outside, and you may go through more trials than your neighbor next door. But guess what? One day, you will be standing before a well that is never going to run dry. Unlike this one. A well that will never stop filling you. And that name is Jesus Christ. You will stand before him and he will say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." The question is, do we want to be in front of that well? Or do we want to go down to Egypt? Where are we going? What well are we drinking from? Because if we're drinking from what God gives, we will get his blessing. It may not look like it to the world, but we'll have peace. We'll have his presence in our lives. We'll have his protection. And we don't have to fear what the Abimelechs around us are going to do to us, because God is faithful. So my question for us today is, are we living in the faith that God has given us, or the faith of someone else? Because you can't live on somebody else's faith. You can't live on old water. You need wells that God has given you. You need peace that God gives. And you need to walk in that faithfully, because when we get to the next story, we're going to see a side of Isaac that doesn't seem to realize that the prophecy made to Sarah applies to him blessing Jacob. And I know I read the last 2 verses of this chapter, but we'll actually touch on those next time, because it gives us a context for what happens in chapter 27. Esau didn't follow in the footsteps of his father. He started marrying women who were, for lack of a better word, quite pagan. And it caused a lot of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. Jacob may have been conniving, but he did listen to his parents about where he chose a bride. And look at how it served him. Now, unfortunately, his uncle was quite conniving too. The kettle and the pot there. But I pray that when we look at this kind of summary of Isaac's life, we see a man who God deals with on an individual basis. This is really the journey of Isaac. The journey of Isaac, seeing God's faithfulness for himself and his family. Yes, it didn't have all the flourishes of Abraham, but did that make it any less worthwhile? No. He saw the goodness of God. He saw the faithfulness of God. You don't have to have this fabulous Christian life story that inspires the whole world to want to be a missionary or whatever it may be. But you have to be faithful in what God has given you and what God has put before you, and to live that life. To be obedient to the little commands God is giving you, because I don't know where I will be in 10 years. I pray that I'm walking with God. But those steps that I make today will affect that journey 10 years from now. I don't know where my children will be 10 years from now, 20 years from now. But I pray that my faithfulness will be an example to them, even in the midst of their rebellion, even in the midst of their trying to figure things out, that God in His might and power would reach down and touch them and let them see that I'm real, and I want you just as much as I wanted your parents. We don't know what it'll take for God to get a hold of our children, but I can guarantee you this: He is faithful. We can trust Him. We don't have to rely on Egypt, which is always a reflection of the world around us. We can run to the Lord and trust Him. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for this passage of Scripture. I thank you that you put this here to see the passing of a generation from a man of God to his son. I pray, Lord, that we would be faithful to pass on a legacy of faithfulness to God to our own children, that they too would desire to walk with you. Lord, that we, as some of us second-generation Christians, would build upon the foundation that you've given us. And yet, Lord, not expect to have the exact same witness and testimony that our parents had. But, Lord, desire to be faithful to your word, to walk with you and to see you daily, encounter your presence in our lives. Guide us this week, Lord. Draw us closer to you. May we encounter you in your word and in your Spirit moving in our lives. We praise you and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Anyone have anything the Lord put on your heart or prayer requests? Carrie?